Okay, I think we can look at this for quite a while and find out that, as mentioned by my colleague who shared it with me, Leon himself, that this particular video, it's just the guys. So I'm not always sure why we end up having the guys with these weird incidents that happen at the workplace. So today's session's focus is just a bit of a holistic approach in terms of that poor housekeeping and stacking and storage can lead to fires, which will lead to first aid and lead to injury on duty reports. So in the end, if we don't think about what we're doing in the workplace, it's a bit of a chain reaction, and each of these events can lead to more serious incidents. So just quickly on Occupational Health and Safety Act. Mariska, sit asseblief jou video af. Jou camera af. Okay. For those of you who don't know, that's Mariska. She's our environmentalist and ergonomist. Currently signing in from East London. So just a quick touch on what health and safety is about. Health and safety is about us as people and companies trying to keep one another safe. And it's not just one person's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. And that is very important to take note of, is that if we can't take responsibility for ourselves, how do we expect other people to take care of us if we can't take care of ourselves? So that is definitely one of the more important things to always think about, is if you think about your own safety, it's very easy to become considerate about other people's safety.
This morning, when you came to work and opened your door, just because someone picked up a pencil, looked over some books, had a cup of hot coffee, did you think you were going to have an accident? No one plans on having an accident, least of all this pretty little thing. A door cause an accident? Well, you never know. It's a swinger. What can I say?
So there's just again examples of how incidents occurring in the workplace, we don't plan for it. It's not like we come to work and think, oh, let's get injured today. When we come to work, things happen. And when we're not focused around us and taking care of what's happening around us, we can then end up getting injured, like something as silly as having your fingers crushed in the door because who thought someone was going to close the door when they walk past you? So as this is a safety, health and safety representatives awareness training, I did feel it's necessary to just help us stay aware of what our responsibilities as employees in the company is. So within the Health and Safety Act, it speaks of both the responsibilities and duties of the employer, but also our responsibilities and duties as employees. So this just talks about that we must take reasonable care of our own health and safety, and how whatever we do can influence other people's work. And there's still going to be several videos showing us how a single person's lack of focus or their lack of thinking what they're going to do causes injury to other people. Further to this, we need to follow instructions given by the employer. We need to assist in carrying out health and safety duties and responsibilities. We need to carry out lawful instructions. We need to report unhealthy and unsafe conditions. And if an employee isn't involved in an incident, it's important to report that, and that we must take good care of the equipment we provided. So one of the reasons I also want to just focus on this is the fact that the employer puts things in place to protect you. And if we don't take care of those strategies put in place and we don't adhere to it, or we do not go through the processes and address issues if there is any issues, then we are opening ourselves up to potential injuries. And again, injuries at the workplace and things like this, horseplay, is not just local in South Africa. This happens across the world. As you see in the previous video, there were few incidents happening in Egypt, in America. They're quite foolish occasionally. This as well, it's not local, this event taking place, but it does happen in South Africa. For some odd reason, work is apparently just not entertaining enough and people have to find different ways. And this is fortunately not an incident where people got injured, but it could have been something where someone got severely injured, being hit by the rocks and the rubble that they're throwing away, or by playing around with equipment that's not meant to be used in this specific way. Okay, so as I've mentioned in the opening slide, the whole focus is to understand that poor housekeeping and poor stacking and storage can result in fires, which also can result in injuries, first aid incidents, and which then leads to IODs. So touching on things about housekeeping, housekeeping's basic rule is there's a place for everything and everything is in its place. So whether it is a drilling machine or a pen, a hole punch or a chair or a ladder, it doesn't matter what the item is that you are working with. Once you're done with it, it has to be put back into its place so it does not have the opportunity to cause you any harm or any injuries. We also speak here about spillages. So if we take an office place and you end up spilling your coffee, that can result in an injury, or you making a mess in the kitchen, someone can slip on a banana peel for all the, if we think about the olden days where those videos show us how people step on a banana peel, slip and fall. When it comes to our work sites and construction, we're talking about spillages in terms of chemicals, oil, diesel. When we are making a mess with cement or any other mixtures that we are mixing on site, even if we go to a manufacturing unit. So it doesn't matter where you are, there are basic principles that we need to implement on a day-to-day basis so that we can ensure that the workplace we are working in is safe and secure. So when there are spills, if something broke, if something isn't clean or there's clutter all over the place, you're putting yourself at risk. Often in office spaces, you have all these extension leads across the floors, and those things are potential tripping hazards. In the workplace, we have people, or in the construction sites, you have the cement in one place and the next moment it's all over the workplace and it's not being stacked properly, which again causes potential risks of hazards, tripping hazards, other injuries. In a manufacturing plant where you're working with welding equipment, you might find that the hoses are in the area where people are walking or there's forklifts driving, and those type of equipment then gets damaged, which puts the user at risk. So be very careful when it comes to working in the workplace, that you keep things safely so that you don't end up getting injured or causing someone else to be injured. Then stacking and storage, I've briefly touched on it. Stacking and storage, especially in a warehouse or a manufacturing plant, has greater risks than maybe in an office space. But you do have people in an office space where they have shelves and shelves of files, and the next moment those shelves can't handle it, and the poor lady in the finance area gets thrown or gets covered in all the files full of paper. There is another incident, I will see if I can get the video before we finish, of an incident in a warehouse where all of these, the shelves came tumbling down. And it wasn't just injuries on duty, but significant financial loss. And when companies suffer financial loss, it also puts pressure on their ability to keep employees employed. So there is a massive, again, I'm going to talk about the chain of events. So if you have an incident in the workplace, it's not just one person getting injured, but the company is losing time of productivity. Productivity losses costs money. Money affects our increases, it affects bonuses, it affects the ability to keep people employed. So when we start getting injured in the workplace from something that we could have controlled, yes, there are events which we can't control. If we think about what happened in KwaZulu-Natal with the floods, those are acts of God in terms of what they call in terms of health and safety. You have the human factor, you have the equipment factor, and then you have the natural events that you cannot control. So there are events where you cannot control what's going to happen, but when you can control it, by just being more cautious ends up helping you sustaining your own ability to be a provider for your family in the future. Some common things when it comes to stacking and storage that we've seen is where a lot of big things, heavy things are stacked at the top, primarily because those are things we don't use that often, but heavy things at the top has a greater risk of making your stacking and storage unstable. So it's important for you to think how you're stacking your shelves so that it doesn't become a risk for the people around you, and making sure that your stacking and storage is on sturdy material. You don't want to stack something on a broken pallet or a bent shelf, because the chances of that then causing an injury or damages to property is much greater. Then when it comes to injuries in the workplace, we have signage and symbols that we need to be aware of. So we have the warning sign, which is the black triangle with the yellow background, often found on your DB boards and your mini substations, also on your generators, especially where the power is being provided from. Also when there is potential hazards of chemicals and corrosive elements. Then we have our red circle with our white background, which is prohibitory. So those are the ones saying that you may not smoke in certain areas, or you may not enter, or the water isn't drinkable, or you're not supposed to walk here, it's restricted. Then our blue, our white on blue background, that's our mandatory signs. PPE is usually associated with it, so wearing of our safety masks, hard hats, goggles, hearing protection, sanitizing, washing your hands, cleaning principles and practices. Then our white on green background, which is then our information, where our assembly points are, which is the best way of exiting a building that is safe. Where is the first aid equipment? And then our red squares on a white background, that's our fire information. So when you're working in a specific area, familiarize yourself with where these signs are so that you can, in the end, protect yourself again. This is an example of a very lucky guy. In most instances, horseplay do lead to severe injuries, severe incidents where people actually can lose their lives. So this is always funny to laugh at, and we laugh at these things a lot, and I myself have laughed at it a lot because I cannot imagine someone being so stupid. But you do find it, and in the workplace, especially when people are very stressed under a lot of pressure, they start doing little things to cheer themselves up, starting to do things that might just boost their energy. And it's those little things that can cause then and result then in potential injuries. Sometimes we're lucky and the horseplay was just someone rolling down the corridors. I know in an office space it's happened once or twice where they have people on the chairs and they're pushing them and they're racing down the corridor, and occasionally everything is fine, and then that one day you're the unfortunate person who sits and on the chair and it breaks and you're the one nose diving into the carpet and has a beautiful carpet burn on your face. Other things where we are pushing people in wheelbarrows, and the next moment you hit a ditch and that person hops out. And yes, it can work for so many occasions. It works fine and nobody gets hurt, but it's that one time where someone do get hurt, and then you have significant consequences from that. Okay, so just with regards to emergency preparedness, always make sure you know who the first aider is and where the first aid equipment is. Make sure that you only get treated by a trained first aider. If you, the first aider, are the poor person who got injured, because Murphy likes to pull these weird stunts occasionally, then you can give someone else permission. They call it the Samaritan Act. So where you won't get punished for helping someone because you're not a first aider. But if there is a first aider available, rather get the first aider to treat the person than trying to be a hero in that instance, because when we're treating someone that got really badly injured, it might have more severe side effects. So make sure your first aider is available, make sure the first aid kit is up to date, and make sure that when there's an incident, you immediately inform the first aider and and get the safety rep and management informed of severe incidents. And then in terms of fire, always obey the no smoking sign. I find it sometimes interesting how people can stand right next to the generator, right next to the fuel can, right next to the tanker, right next to the chemicals, and they stand and smoke there. And fortunately, there hasn't been anything with SAR clients where people got burned from this, but it can have severe results where you're still smoking and there's fumes in the air, and that little coal on the end of your cigarette just heats up those fumes, and the next moment you have an explosion or you're covered in severe burns. So when you do smoke, if you are a smoker, make sure you smoke in a safe space, that you don't end up putting your own life and the people around you at risk. Good housekeeping is very important. Know where your nearest fire extinguishers are and know who your fire fighters are in your team, so that when there is a fire, you can call the right person. Okay. So IODs, we're nearing the end. IODs, it's very important that when there's an injury at the workplace, you report it. Whether it's a near miss, whether it's a minor incident, whether it's a major incident, it must be reported, because in the event of a near miss, it's an event that could have resulted in a severe injury. There was an incident at one of the big warehousing companies in South Africa where someone was fixing a light bulb in the air on a cherry picker, and they dropped the screwdriver, and I think it was about 6 meters up, and the screwdriver fortunately landed next to the person standing below at the base of the cherry picker, and that screwdriver got stuck inside the concrete. Now imagine if it can go through concrete, what's the chances of that screwdriver getting stuck in your skull the next time? So when there are things that could have resulted in major incidents, do report it so that tactics can be looked at, whether it's a safe work procedure, training, a risk assessment that needs to be reviewed, so that those things can be assessed to ensure that it doesn't happen again, or make sure that if it can happen again, you have strategies and principles in place to protect you against those things. And then in terms of your workman's compensation, all incidents must be reported to the Department of Labour within 7 days. And for our labour and health and safety clients at SAR Synergy, the COI department do assist with any IODs, with queries with regards to your any changes within the business, following up on IODs with the workman's compensation, getting your claim numbers, getting your letter of good standing sorted. So if you ever need assistance with an IOD at the workplace, please feel free to contact our COI department. They I will make their contact details also available at the end, but it's coid@sar.co.za. So if there's ever a IOD and you need assistance with it, please don't hesitate to contact us to assist you with regards to your IODs and letter of good standings. Okay. And that is it on the presentation. If you want attendance certificate, please, you can email angel@sar.co.za. Please email your ID document along with your company name so that we can then make sure that we have the correct details on your attendance certificate. And then, as I've mentioned, let me just quickly add COID also here to the bottom of that slide for you. And I'll leave this a few seconds on here. Okay. Then I have one last video I would like to play. It's based on a poem that said, I could have saved a life that day. And it's just there to remind us that someone's life might actually be, could have been saved by just a chat or just a quick say, hey, are you sure you're okay situation. So it's this particular video was recorded by the Heathrow Airport in England. So I'm just quickly going to get this onto the screen.
Everyone loves spreadsheets. Actually, they don't. But check this out. Okay, Monday.com, get started.
I could have saved a life that day, but I chose to look the other way. It wasn't that I didn't care. I had the time, and I was there.
But I didn't want to seem a fool and argue over a safety rule.
I knew he'd done the job before. If I spoke up, he might get sore.
The chances didn't seem that bad. I'd done the same. He knew I had, so I shook my head and walked by. He knew the risks as well as I.
He took the chance, I closed an eye, and with that act, I let him die.
I could have saved a life that day, but I chose to look the other way.
Now every time I see his wife, I know I should have saved his life.
That guilt is something I must bear, but isn't something you need to share.
If you see a risk that others take that puts their health or life at stake.
The question asked or thing you say could help them live another day.
If you see a risk and walk away, then hope you never have to say, I could have saved a life that day, but I chose to look the other way.
So that just, again, puts the power in our hands as safety representatives, as people, to say that, you know what, if I see someone in my team being unsafe, then I have a responsibility to myself and to them to make them aware and to take action and try to protect them against the possibility. Just because it might have worked once or twice doing it the wrong way does not mean it will always be fine, because next time you might have to be that person who goes up to a wife or a child or a husband and say, I'm sorry that that person passed away, knowing inside that you could have saved that life that day. Thank you, guys. If there's any questions, anything specifically you would like to ask, please pop it into the chat box below. We would gladly like to answer your questions. If there isn't any questions, then thank you for your time. Thank you for taking part. We will share again the next, send an invite. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Stefan, for your question. So there isn't any fines in the event of an incident unless it was found that you were negligible in the act. So when it comes to an incident in the workplace, if someone gets injured and they need to, get my thoughts together. So if there's a major incident, the Department of Labor will come and do an investigation. If they found that the company is negligible and that the company or even an employee was in breach of legislation or company practices, then there will be a court case, and then the court will determine whether that person might actually go to prison or might be fined. So it all depends on how severe the non-compliance was with the legislation, on whether it's anything between 1 year or 150,000 Rand and upwards. And there has been instances where employees who were non-compliant with legislation and company practices have even been fined such high penalties for non-compliance. So it can have significant effects in that regard. An accident is, thank you, Quenda. So the difference between an incident and an accident is not much, except that an incident can refer to An accident can refer to that it was an accidental event, while an incident can actually be intentional. So incident or accident, it refers to an instance where someone either got injured or something happened and got damaged. But an accident is something that wasn't intended to occur, while an incident was an intentional omission or of the regulation or rules of the company. Oh, and just Gwenda, I would like the ID copy, please. Just make sure we spell all the details correctly on the certificate. There isn't a difference between the documentation filed for incidents and accidents, Inga. So when it comes to an IOD, we complete the same forms. It's the incident and accident investigation forms. So it's the same set of documents we complete. The procedure are also one procedure that addresses both. And when it comes to IODs, we then complete the WCL2 form, and then the employer report completes the WCL2 form, and then we get forms from the doctors, which is called the WCL4, 5, and 6, depending on the progression of an incident. Okay, hi Tamika, thank you for your question. Your question is that if a worker gets injured while not following work instructions or not wearing the correct PPE that the company has provided, would the company still be liable? So in the event of an employee not following rules in terms of health and safety, companies are required to take disciplinary action. So we usually go the non-conformance route, saying that you're not compliant with legislation or company practices. And if they continue, we then start with the warnings, etc. As long as you can prove that you have tried everything in your ability to get an employee to adhere to company rules, the company can never be held liable. In the end, should the person get injured, we still have to report it to the workman's compensation, and then it's the workman's compensation's decision whether they're going to accept liability or not. And if they then find but the employee was negligible, they will then give an outcome stating that based on the evidence provided, the cost is for the employee, or if it was determined by them that it was not negligible by the employee, then and they don't accept liability, then the cost falls on the employer. But if an employee does not adhere to company rules, it's important to follow the disciplinary practices. Nikita, okay, so in the event of an accident or incident, who's responsible? The 16.2, the SHREP, or the CEO? When the rules and regulations are clearly laid out, not only by signage, toolboxes, etc. Okay, so in terms of legislation, SHREPs cannot be held accountable for the non-compliance of employees. So should there be an incident or an accident in the workplace, accountability will be determined by the Department of Labor on whether it's then the 16.2 or the CEO. So as an employer of the company, you are primarily responsible for the safety of the people in the workplace. The 16.2 is assigned, is delegated responsibilities, but even the 16.2 cannot be held liable for everything that goes wrong in a company. The employer is unfortunately always in that top position, having to give answers if the rest of the system failed. So if your system works that you can say, but I have communicated everything to all my employees, I've given them training, I've given them PPE, I've been following up on all these practices, then there is no accountability or liability that can fall onto an employer if they can prove that they've tried everything reasonably practicable within their workplace. So That's why the practice is to say, if we follow all these little steps, and they sometimes an annoyance, we can make sure that the company and the employer is protected against an employee who is being negligible in that possibility, because the company doesn't want to close and put a bunch of people out of work just because one person didn't want to follow the rules. And when it comes to something like that, it does go to a court of law, and it is put to the test with a judge to say, okay, you know what? Yes, the company did everything they could, so the employer cannot held liable. Then Sibongile, all injuries must be reported to your HR manager, but not everything will be reported to the Department of Labor. So if it's a first aid incident, the records must be kept, but only if you need to go to a doctor and other people for assistance. So you need to go to the hospital, doctor, physio. We've had an incident where people were hijacked at gunpoint, so they had to go for post-traumatic stress treatment. Those are things that needs to be paid out by workmen's compensation, and therefore all incidents must be reported. Minor incidents, so for instance, going to give an example, we had a merchandiser who was packing shelves in Pick n Pay. He worked for a different company, and he got injured where he scratched his leg with a little piece of wire, and he didn't report it. And 4 months later, he came back to work, and they followed absconsion procedures and all those things. But that little scratch got infected, and the guy ended up losing his leg. But because he didn't report it, there was no way to assist or compensate him in that regard. So it is very important that even minor things, a little scratch or a little cut, is recorded somewhere, that should it have to be reported to the workman's compensation for further treatment later on, you as an employee and the company are protected in that regard. If a person, so Bernadette, if a person passes away in the workplace because of work-related incident, then yes, it is covered by the workman's compensation and later on by the UIF. So important in this regard, the person must pass away because of an injury related from the workplace. Things like an epilepsy attack or a stroke, it's not something that's covered by workman's compensation because they don't regard it as something that was caused by the workplace itself, unless a doctor can prove beyond reasonable doubt that it was work-related. So if a person passes away because they were in a car accident driving towards a client, or they were driving a truck, or they fell off a height and they passed away, those things are covered by workman's compensation. Nikita, yes. Employers sometimes fail in proving that they were not liable because of the fact that they don't have the proof or the evidence available. Yes, it's a headache when it comes to the paperwork, but that's the way, it's the only way to prove that a company did try everything they've done. Stefan, could you possibly highlight the difference between workmen's? Okay, so COIDA, Compensation of Occupational Injuries Diseases Act, that is the legislation governing workmen's compensation. So WCA stands for the Workmen's Compensation Assurance. So they're an insurance company within the Department of Labor who protects employees from work-related incidents and diseases. Within the WCA, we also have RMA, which is Rand Mutual Assurance, and we have FEMA, which is the Federation of Employers Mutual Assurance. So it's different entities, but in every company first has to register with workmen's compensation, and then the workmen's comp will designate them to either RMA or FEMA. Thank you, Nikita. Yes, workman's compensation, that's actually your, so it's your letter of good standing. It's very important. Companies must be up to date with the letter of good standing. So your return of earnings must be submitted annually based on your payroll. And then you get an invoice, which is a fee that you pay based on your industry type. To then be your financial cover should an employee have to go to the hospital or be treated by a doctor, so that the financial burden doesn't fall back on the employer. Yaku, scenario, driver needed to take a gravel road due to strikes. Long story short, tire burst, lost control, and she ended up in the field. Car is 100%. She did not sustain any injuries. I wanted to report this as a near miss, and the manager said I need to do an IOD. Under what do I need to report this? This is not because she didn't sustain any injuries, or there was no injuries reported at that point in time. It will be considered a near miss. What should be taken into consideration here is that just because she didn't show any injuries at that particular time does not mean that later on there might be complications because they didn't pick up on a possible broken rib or a head injury or some muscle tension and things that needs to be treated later on. So you'll first report it as a near miss, and then should something happen after that near miss, then we go into the injury on duty. Okay. If the car, however, was damaged, then it would be, you will have to complete the incident and accident investigation reports. Whilst Yaku is talking about the driver here, we had an incident at a previous company as I was working at. The employee had to go and pick up colleagues before they went to a construction site, and on his way to pick up his colleagues, a drunk driver hit him. Fortunately, his logbook, so that's something very important if you have drivers in your company, whether they're driving their own vehicle or a company vehicle, they need to keep record of their kilometers, because the moment you're in an accident because you were traveling for work purposes, you are covered by the workman's compensation as long as you can prove it. So the employee's logbook was fortunately up to date. However, he had to be airlifted. He was in ICU for a month, and he had to get quite a lot of treatment and therapy after he started to recover, so that he could walk again. So he sustained a head injury. He even had a surgery to his leg, which resulted in his leg being shortened slightly due to the injury. And the hospital bill, I'm talking about 10 or so years ago, 15 years ago, was in excess of R1 million. That company paid back then about 20,000 Rand in their return of earnings, but they were covered for the full amount of that incident with the Department of Labor with workman's compensation. So it's very important that if you think about this as an insurance policy for your workers, that if you don't use it, then we're all glad that you never had to be in that position with a person getting injured. But if you do have to use it, then it becomes, it's quite a significant benefit to a company. So please, yes, the Department of Labor gives us a lot of headaches, and that's why we as a service provider took it over from our clients so that you don't have to face that battle. But they do cover quite a significant amount of money and trying to cover employees. So that employee's salary was covered whilst he was in the hospital and receiving treatment. All his medical bills were covered, etc. So workman's compensation does have a great benefit if companies are up to date with all their paperwork. Even said that if a company is registered with the workman's compensation and you are behind on a submission or you didn't pay, doesn't mean your employee won't be protected. It can, however, result in you as a company being fined later on for not adhering to legislation. So your employees will remain protected with the workman's compensation because you're registered with them. But if your letter of good standing is out of date, it does not mean you're not that your employees are no longer covered. It just means that if you don't get up to date, you're going to be fined a significant. They fine you, they penalize you, and they load you with interest as a company if you don't stay up to date with that. How much of a role does ergonomics play in accident incident while working? Let's say fatigue due to long hours of driving. Compensation states that no driving can only be executed between 7 and 10. The driver dies in this accident. How will the employer be able to protect or defend itself? Nikita, just you say that the company policy and procedure states that no driving may happen between 7 or 10, or can only happen between 7 and 10. If the person then gets injured after those hours and the company policy said that the person may only drive between 7 and 10, then it all happens. Then the question becomes, why was the person still driving after 10? So maybe he was in an area where it was unsafe to pull over, or there was an instruction given by someone else in the company that put pressure on him to continue driving. So there will be a lot more investigated in something like that. If it's just on the driver, workman's compensation will then determine whether they're going to accept liability or not. Okay. Any other questions by anyone? I would like to thank everyone for attending and for taking part. And please, if there's any other questions, don't hesitate to contact us. We enjoy giving feedback. We like to give as much information as possible. So if there's any questions and if we can assist in any way, please let us know. You all have Angel's Angel's email address if there's any queries from our labor clients. If you are a health and safety client, you of course have your own contact persons in terms of what do you call it? In terms of health and safety. So there's Trenley, there's Stefan, there's Leon, Inga, Prudence. The whole gang is available for the health and safety clients to make use of. And then we will be sharing the link for the next one as soon as possible for you to then take part. We also just want to mention there will be another invite going out to health and safety clients. We are launching a compliance challenge for our health and safety clients, where there will be some big rewards up for grabs for the clients who become compliant in terms of legislation, where we then also give you a certificate to say that you're compliant in terms of legislation. So we're giving the whole process up till end of Feb, and then March we will announce the winners for the compliance challenge. So please keep an eye out for that email that will be shared by your health and safety practitioner. Okay, thank you everyone and have a lovely day. Ooh, sorry, Shivani, I will be giving you feedback shortly. Ooh, there's 2 more questions. Sorry. Okay. Shivani, if nothing is in writing, will employees still be covered in the event of any injury whilst carrying out work responsibilities out of office? If the work is if the activity is aligned with the company's work practices, yes. Just because something's not in writing does not mean it's not that it's not in agreement. So even in a he said, she said environment, there are still employees will still be covered by the workman's compensation as long as what they were doing was in line with what the company does as a business. Okay. And then in the event of a petrol attendant has to wear safety shoes as per company policy, but the size 1 is not made and has to be specially made, which is extra cost to the company. Should we move the attendant to, let's say, the cashier area, or go the extra mile to get that 1 size, 1 shoe sorted? Nikita, that depends on the company. I can't really see that the cost is that significant, but yes, the company must ensure that the person is protected, and if they cannot provide the employee with the given protective equipment, then they need to make alternative arrangements to ensure that the employee is covered, and in no instance can an employee ever be held liable for the cost of their own protection. So PPE is provided at company cost, and if the only in the event where the employee throw their things away or they intentionally cause damage to it is an employee liable. But in terms of the general safety regulations, an employer must always pay for an employee's safety equipment. Okay. Great. If a worker is injured at home, so this was a personal injury and cannot wear their PPE, what can the company do? In that instance, if the employee cannot wear his PPE, he is unable to perform his duties. So either the doctor needs to book him off until he's fit to do his work, or he needs to do something different at the office until he is able to do his work again. So this then falls back on the whole thing regarding medical fitness. An employee that's unfit to perform their work then needs to be either put on a lesser type, less intense type of activity where they might need to sit in an office, or in an event even sweep the floors if they cannot perform the duties that they're appointed for due to an injury they caused to themselves. But Tamika, that's something we can maybe discuss in more detail with Trenley and Marius and see how we can assist you guys. How often should the employer issue out PPE to employees? That depends on the type of work. In some working environments, you can wear the same pair of safety boots for 3 years, and in other environments, you might need to replace your safety boots every 3 to 4 months. It needs to be determined by your by a risk assessment, and an assessment must be done to say, okay, but the type of work you're doing is so intense that the PPE cannot last a full 12 months. So that is something the employer will have to assess to determine how frequently PPE must be changed.